excitement.
Fighting for the family, standing for the church, laboring to return to a moral and biblically based culture.
This is the American Family Association at AFA Today.
And we welcome you to the New York studios in Lower Manhattan in the shadow of the Empire State Building. I'm sorry, not the Empire State Building. We're about half a block from the Empire State Building. We welcome you to the building known as the World Trade Center Freedom Tower, just a block away. And we are coming to you from studios located right there in Lower Manhattan. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us on AFA today. And we want to, of course, always do everything we can to stretch our thinking skills and make sure that we are growing our ability to process. Sometimes that is done for us. Sometimes it is made easy for us because of the way public figures live their life and the way they go about conducting their role, sometimes in office, sometimes right in front of us. And I want to bring this up before we get any further, because there's a lot of stories today that all deal with the president, and they all deal with things about the president and some of the things we've been told about the president. And the reason that I feel these are important to discuss is because they all kind of line up a centralized core assumption about the president that I think is kind of interesting. And just in the last 24 hours, these stories have all kind of been put together and come together. Now, last week, there was a story in the New York Times that said that the Benghazi attack of 9/11/2012 had not, they said there was no evidence that it had really been perpetrated by any of al-Qaeda's operatives. The problem with that is that there have been several people that, depending on the investigation that you've looked at and followed and watched, including the Libyans' own investigation, as they were discussing it amongst themselves long before the Americans finally got around to investigating it. Remember, it took us weeks to get the first person on the ground to be able to get into the compound that had been burned out and to see what the facts were there on the ground. But the interesting thing about this is the New York Times comes out last week and basically, I think, tried to shoot a cover blast, kind of protecting the president and the administration in trying to wish this thing to go away. Well, it's one thing for the president to wish that. It's another thing for his operatives to try to make that happen. And certainly the New York Times would be friendly to the president that's in office. It's another thing entirely for the one of the president's more liberal comrades in the Senate. One of his close people that he's worked with and been kind of joined at the hip with since he came into Washington, D.C. politics, to flat out disregard, dispute, and call into question the idea that report was in fact accurate. And that's exactly what Senator Dianne Feinstein of California is doing. According to Mediaite this morning, Senator Dianne Feinstein called into question the central thesis of the recent New York Times article arguing that the 2012 attack on the American Benghazi consulate had not been perpetrated by al-Qaeda. In other words, she's saying, I don't believe that report. She went on to say, I believe that groups loosely associated with al-Qaeda were involved. She said to the Hill newspaper, that's my understanding. She added that the alternate explanation that the attack had been catalyzed by an anti-Islam YouTube video doesn't jibe with me. However, after the Hill ran the headline, Feinstein rejects NYT on Benghazi, a spokesman for Feinstein's office qualified those remarks. When Senator Feinstein said loosely affiliated, she clearly was referring to groups not directly connected to or taking orders from core AQ in Pakistan, which was essentially the conclusion. The New York Times as well, said Brian Weiss on the Hill. So to say she rejected the conclusion of the Times is an overstatement. Well, whether you call it rejecting it or not, she did dispute the report that was in the New York Times. And this is how, friends, I want you to pay attention to this, because how her spokesman handled this afterwards is really telling of the political left. First of all, we know some things about the people that were involved in Benghazi. We know, for instance, that the people that pulled it off ran around Benghazi for weeks in public, doing interviews with Arabic television and radio outlets saying that they had basically performed the operation. We knew that the people that admitted to that had, on some level, been associated with directly with Ansar al-Sharia, which does interact with Al-Qaeda around the world directly on many, many of its things and many, many of its beliefs. Now, let me take it one step further. You have Dianne Feinstein, who sits on the National Security Subcommittee in the U.S. Senate. See, she sees this stuff. She understands and she knows the reports that come out on a daily basis, and she has seen the correlation between all of those things take place. And when the New York Times says, not to worry, this wasn't real terrorism, these weren't really terrorists that were associated with Al-Qaeda that did any of this. See, the New York Times did that by just the barely legal definition of what that was. Dianne Feinstein actually expressed in her own comments the truth. That is that these guys that carried out this task, while they may not have received a direct order from Al-Qaeda to go do it, they are in bed with Al-Qaeda. They are Al-Qaeda sympathizers. They are Al-Qaeda through and through. They believe in the same mission, the same goals, the same accomplishment as Osama bin Laden. These people want to see America be brought to its knees. So for Dianne Feinstein to say, don't tell me that they're not intending to hurt us and that they're not of the same ideological makeup as Osama bin Laden, and that from that perspective it's not Al-Qaeda that's involved. It is Al-Qaeda that's involved. She made that statement pretty bluntly, pretty fairly to the Hill, and the aftermath of the damage control I don't think going to work out that well for her. Well, here's some interesting things. Why does that matter? Why does it matter that Dianne Feinstein has said to the president, or said about the president, well, I don't agree with your report or what the New York Times has said about this, that this, in fact, was most likely the handiwork of Al-Qaeda? Well, it's not convenient for the president or for Mrs. Clinton, who will likely run for president in 2016, to continue the mantra that this was some sort of spontaneous uprising, which we have known since the very night that it happened that it wasn't. We've known since the very night that it took place that this wasn't spontaneous. It had nothing to do with a video being made from somebody in America and had it gone viral on YouTube. None of that turned out to be true. We know that the administration worked itself up into a frenzy trying to come out with the right story, and then sent out Dr. Susan Rice, who wasn't even in a position to know anything about it, to go to all the Sunday shows and say, no, this is the best of our knowledge. It was a videotape that did all of this. Well, there's one other story today that Fox News is reporting. The Benghazi transcripts, top defense officials briefed Obama on attack, not a video and not a protest. Let me just delve into this with you for a little bit. Minutes after the American consulate in Benghazi came under assault on September 11, 2012, the nation's top civilian and uniformed defense officials, headed for a previously scheduled Oval Office session with President Obama, were informed that the event was a terrorist attack. This, according to declassified documents. The new evidence raises questions of why the top military men, one of whom was a member of the president's cabinet, allowed him and other senior administration officials to press a false narrative of the Benghazi attacks for 2 weeks afterwards. General Carter Ham, who at the time was head of AFRICOM, the Defense Department combatant command with jurisdiction over Libya, told the House in classified testimony last year that it was him who broke the news about the unfolding situation in Benghazi to then Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The tense briefing, in which it was already known that the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, had been targeted and had gone missing, occurred just before two senior officials departed the Pentagon for their session with the commander-in-chief. We are finally figuring out that there was somebody that knew where the president was that night, because we've been told that he wasn't around. We don't know where he was. We've been told he was off somewhere else, but nobody knows, nobody's saying, nobody's speaking up about where that was. But it turns out, according to these declassified documents, there were at least the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Defense Secretary en route to go meet with him about a terrorist attack in Benghazi. Not an uprising, not some sort of spontaneous rebellion against America. No, a thoroughly thought out, planned attack against our people in that city. General Carter Ham went on to say, my first call was to General Dempsey to say, hey, I'm headed down the hall. I need to see him right away. Ham told the lawmakers at the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation. I told him what I knew. We immediately walked upstairs to meet with Secretary Panetta. Ham's account of that fateful day included some 450 pages of testimony given by senior Pentagon officials in classified closed-door meetings conducted last year by the Armed Services Subcommittee. The testimony given under top-secret clearance and only declassified this month presents a rare glimpse into how the information during a crisis travels at the top echelons of America's national security apparatus, all the way up to the president. Now, 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Last week, it was very interesting because as some members of the press corps were still pressing Jay Carney in the White House press office about whether or not Benghazi was a relevant discussion. And then when Bridgegate came along with, the jolly governor from New Jersey, not Santa Claus, but Chris Christie, when that conversation began to be had, some people asked Jay Carney, well, what did the president know about Benghazi? And at the same time, because here you have a dereliction of duty, according to Chris Christie's words, that caused a traffic jam on a bridge, that even if he didn't know about it directly, he empowered the people that made the decision, so therefore he should be standing for the discussion about what happened. He should be standing responsible, to which I believe he said in his press conference that he did take responsibility. But we still don't have anything on record from the then Secretary of State and the woman that would like to be the next president, or the president himself, about where the president's whereabouts were, or about why this was sold to everyone as a simple protest that got out of hand. Now these declassified statements come along this many weeks and months later, years, and lo and behold, what do we have? We have an increasingly colored-in picture about what the president's people knew and when they knew it. And it wasn't 2 weeks after the attack. It was a few minutes after the attack. Your reaction to this, 888-589-8840. It is AFA Today on AFR Talk. Kevin McCullough with you from New York per usual. The new information about Benghazi, what happened, and why the declassified documents are now saying something different than what we were told. Your reaction to it, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. I'm Kevin McCullough, coming right back on AFA Today.